tengo el honor de presentar el siguiente espacio, titulado La década del envejecimiento saludable. Y para ello vamos a contar con el doctor Jarbas Barbosa. El doctor Jarbas Barbosa, director de la Organización de la Salud en Washington. Y a continuación va a participar también Fiona, que también se encuentran ambos en la ciudad de Washington, D.C. Y tenemos el honor de contar. Voy a decir unas líneas para que sepáis la relevancia de cada uno de ellos, del rol que ocupan. El doctor Jarbas Barbosa es director de la Organización Panamericana de la Salud por los Estados miembros, por la Organización Panamericana de la Salud, la OPS. Desde el 28 de septiembre del 2022, desde julio del 2027 a su nombramiento como director, el doctor Barbosa ha desempeñado el cargo de subdirector de la Oficina Sanitaria Panamericana, donde estuvo al frente de 5 departamentos técnicos y del Fondo Rotatorio de la OPS, un programa especial para aumentar el acceso equitativo a las vacunas en toda la región de Américas. Fiona, que nos acompañará justo a continuación, es directora global en el Banco Mundial de Envejecimiento y Pensiones en la práctica global de protección. Actualmente se encuentra en la ciudad de Barcelona, participando en un espacio que están haciendo sobre el tema que ella está liderando de todo el Grupo Banco Mundial. Fiona asesora en el Banco Mundial, asesora en materia de políticas de pensiones y envejecimiento a gobiernos y reguladores de todo el mundo. Trabajamos con ella, además de la mano, que es una mujer espectacular, comprometida, y anteriormente, como parte del equipo de finanzas a largo plazo del Banco Mundial, ha liderado la coordinación de finanzas sostenibles, incluyendo la representación de la institución del banco en el grupo de trabajo de finanzas sostenibles del G20, donde se desempeñó allí mismo como secretaria de la coalición de los ministros de finanzas para la acción climática. Desde el 2004, Fiona ha trabajado en la División de Asuntos Financieros, la OCDE, ha dirigido a la Secretaría de la Organización Internacional de Supervisores de Pensiones, la IOPS, y antes de incorporarse a la OCDE, también trabajó en el sector de fondos de pensiones, incluyendo su cargo como directora de gestión de activos en American Express en Japón. Ha formado parte del consejo asesor de uno de los fondos de pensiones de la OCDE y representa al personal del Banco Mundial en el Comité de Fondos de Pensiones de la organización. Es licenciada en la Universidad de Oxford y John Hopkins y cuenta con una certificación analista financiero. Ella es espectacular, no solo profesional y con el conocimiento técnico, personalmente tiene un compromiso con lo que está liderando y es un súper honor presentarles y escucharles a ambos en este espacio sobre la década del envejecimiento saludable. Muchísimas gracias a ambos por participar en el día de hoy.
Distinguidas e distinguidos participantes del Congresso Silver Economy, reciban un cordial saludo. La Organización Panamericana de la Salud, OPS, es el principal organismo internacional de salud pública en las Américas. Desde hace más de un siglo, promovemos la cooperación basada en la evidencia científica y la solidaridad como pilares del desarrollo sostenible. Nuestro doble mandato como agencia del Sistema Interamericano y, al mismo tiempo, Oficina Regional de la Organización Mundial de la Salud para las Américas, nos permite apoyar a los países en el fortalecimiento de sus sistemas de salud, la respuesta ante emergencias y la reducción de las desigualdades. Proteger la salud y el bienestar de las poblaciones es el centro de nuestra misión. Y en ese contexto, las personas mayores son una prioridad estratégica. Las Américas atravessam um processo de envejecimento acelerado. Entre 2014 e 2023, a população menor de 15 anos diminuiu em quase um 12%, mientras que a população de 65 anos e mais aumentou em cerca de um 23%. Esse câmbio demográfico nos planteia um desafio urgente, pero também uma grande oportunidade. Por ello, a OPS impulsa a década del envejecimiento saludable, apoyando a los países en el desarrollo de políticas que mejoren la calidad de vida de las personas mayores, sus familias y sus comunidades. Eso implica no solo vivir más, sino vivir mejor, con salud, autonomía y dignidad. Implica también prevenir la mortalidad prematura y reducir las desigualdades en toda la región. Hemos logrado avances importantes. Com apoio da OPS, vários países han desarrollado estratégias para melhorar o bem-estar em la vejez e cerrar a brecha que aún alcanza cerca de 12 años entre la esperanza de vida y la esperanza de vida saludable. México, país anfitrião, ha demonstrado um liderazgo destacado, com iniciativas como Salud Casa por Casa e el impulso a las ciudades amigables com as pessoas maiores. Agora continuarei em inglês. Investing in healthy aging is a strategic opportunity to strengthen the resilience of our social, economic, and health systems. The silver economy goes beyond consumption. It creates opportunities for innovation, employment, adapted services, and sustainable economic growth. Investing in health throughout the life course also strengthens economies and builds more resilient and inclusive societies. In the Americas, every dollar invested in health generates at least $30 in social and economic returns. We must also address the specific needs of women. Women live longer but face higher risks of chronic conditions and dependency while carrying a disproportionate share of caregiving responsibilities. Closing the global health gap for women could generate 75 million disability-adjusted life years each year, at the equivalent of 7 healthy days per woman, and contribute up to $1 trillion annually to global GDP by 2040. The silver economy is not a niche market. It is a strategic pathway for social development and public health. Investing in healthy aging improves lives, strengthens economies, and builds more equitable and resilient societies. The Pan American Health Organization reaffirms its commitment to advancing the decade of healthy aging, together with countries and partners, to ensure that longer lives become a true opportunity for well-being, leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Fiona Stewart. I'm the Global Lead for Aging at the World Bank and delighted to be addressing you at this excellent Silver Economy Congress. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, as this is a hugely important topic for development and for us here at the World Bank. And indeed, demographics is one of the huge success stories of development. For the first time, we're living not just longer all around the world, but living healthier. And we have a cohort, a group of people in their 50s and in their 60s, 1.5 billion people around the world at those age groups. And for the first time, we're healthy. So how do we harness these people? How do we harness these cohorts to really contribute and really make sure that demographics continues to be a positive driver for our economies and for our societies going forward? And this really is a global challenge, not just in Latin America, where you're aging fast. I learned the other day that the birth rate in Bogota is actually now lower than in Tokyo, which is very surprising. But we know obviously that our colleagues in Asia, our counterparts in Asia, are aging incredibly quickly. So, for example, it took over 100 years for Spain to see its, and France and our European colleagues, for their populations to become aged, to go from 7% to 14% of their population over 65. It took over 100 years in Europe. In Vietnam, in Thailand, it's going to take less than 20, 17, 18 years, incredibly quickly. So we really need to adapt labor markets, financial markets, social protection systems. The challenge is they're not developing as quickly as we need them to make sure that they really can support 100-year lives that we're going to be living. And even in regions like Africa, which are still very young, even in Africa by 2050, there will be as many Africans aged over 60 as there are Europeans. So this really is a global challenge and opportunity for us to grasp. So let's think about some of the challenges we need to overcome and the changes we need to make in our labour markets and in our financial markets. So we see 3 areas that we need to work on our labour markets. One, some people will want to and need to, and we should support to work longer. And at the moment, you actually see some of our systems, our labour market systems, our pension systems, actually disincentivize people from working longer rather than supporting them to do so. And if you look around the world, people actually drop out of the formal labour market very early, way before retirement age, formal retirement ages in their 50s and their 60s, they're already dropping out of formal work. For example, in Thailand, where you can draw your social security at 55, even though people are living way up to almost 80 in Thailand, people then come out of the labour market, go into the informal sector and draw through the pay down they've had from their pensions very quickly in a few years. So we really need to think about how we keep people in work for longer and make sure they have a retirement income when they do need to leave. Part of that also is family support. A lot of people are dropping out the sandwich generation, not just for childcare, but for elderly care. So making sure we have flexible labour markets that allow us to change as our family needs and as our work needs change. Very important we do so. And we're seeing some of those flexible supports coming in, for example, to some of the European and OECD countries. Then we also need to think about reskilling and upskilling. We're all going to have to think about how we need to really adapt the skills that we need as the labour markets are changing very rapidly in future. And here I think we're underestimating the productivity of older workers. And what we're seeing, our modelling, we assume that people have become less productive as they age. But actually, if you train workers, actually that may not be the case. So for example, I was talking to the colleagues from British Telecom, BT, one of the big telecom companies in my home country, the UK. And they saw when they actually had age agnostic training and trained their engineers and their workers over 55, over 45, actually you can see the productivity goes up for older workers more than younger workers. And intergenerational workforces, teams of different ages working together, actually have shown to be more productive in countries like Italy. So I think really thinking about how we train and really use this opportunity to make sure we're making really good use of what can be very productive older workers as well, and getting rid of that mindset that productivity finishes with age. It doesn't need to. And finally, the third prong of the labour markets, we need to be sure that people who do retire and have to retire and finish work do so with dignity. And around 40% of workers in low-income countries are actually working beyond healthy life expectancy, which is not what we want. So we need to be sure that we have the social protection, social assistance, social pensions in place to make sure that people can retire with dignity and get the support that they need. Now, the other big change, which I know you'll be discussing and have been discussing at the Congress, is the financial system. And again, I think we need to ask, do we have the financial products that we really need for a 100-year life? Many of the people are changing as we're seeing people change their working patterns and coming into different second phases of their work life into their 40s, 50s and 60s. We need to support them to be entrepreneurs. Great programs our IFC colleagues, and I'm sure we'll be talking about in the silver economy and the silver bond program. It can be quite hard to get a loan to start up a business if you're over 50. How do we support and train and really make use of these old entrepreneurs who really can be a driving force for our silver economies right across the world? We're working on that in Latin American countries, lots of interest from Thailand and some of the East Asia countries as well. And then products. We need to be sure that as we're living longer, we have different needs at older ages. How can we think about things like insurance for long-term care? A lot of people are very unsure at the moment of what their needs will be. We need insurance to make sure that we can make sure that we have the coverage we need at older ages. But there's not a lot of long-term care insurance products out there. How do we make sure that we are getting creativity in our financial sector to make the products that people need? Reverse mortgages. Another topic, another product that was available has had a bit of a bad reputation in some countries, but I think is coming back in a much more regulated way to make sure that people maybe have assets and have in their housing, but may need to draw that down for care needs or for income needs as you live longer. Interesting products coming up in Australia, in China, in Singapore, where the regulators very much a public-private, where you have a regulatory backstop, but the private sector and the public sector working together, I think can get much more creative on these income drawdown topics and products. And finally, on annuities, many pension funds around the world pay out a lump sum, which doesn't give you a full coverage of the income you need in retirement, particularly if we're living longer and having longer periods in retirement at the end of our lives. How do we get annuity markets, more creative, more flexible annuities that really meet people's needs? So I think a lot more questions and work together that we need to do between regulators and the private sector to make sure we have the financial products that we need. So just to say, this really is a global topic. It's a very important one for here as us at the bank. Looking forward to learning all the great really innovations in the silver economy that's coming out of the region, and really looking forward to following up and hearing about the excellent products and projects that you're working on. Thank you.